The royal decree arrived on parchment sealed with blood, and Astrid knew, the moment she broke that wax, that her daughter's life was forfeit. The pack law was absolute. No Omega could claim a child of alpha blood. Yet there, in the great hall of Vinterskog, stood her Embla, barely 17 summers old, cradling a newborn whose eyes already burned with the gold of the Eriksson line. "Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because what happens next will break something inside you that you didn't know could shatter." Embla had hidden her pregnancy beneath layers of wool and shame, scrubbing floors in the West Wing where the nobility never ventured. She'd bound her belly with linen strips until her ribs ached, praying to gods who had long stopped listening to Omega prayers. But babies have their own timing, and this one, this impossible forbidden child, had chosen the winter solstice to arrive, when every alpha, beta, and elder gathered for the blood oath ceremony. The great hall fell silent. Not the comfortable silence of respect, but the terrible quiet that precedes violence. Lady Sigrid Mansdaughter, first beta of the Northern Court, stood from her throne of carved elk bone. Her lip curled with disgust so pure it could have frozen the tapestries on the walls. "Remove that creature from the hall. Pack law forbids Omega filth from." "Mother!" The word came from the doorway. Not a question, not a plea. A statement that rearranged the very molecules of air in the room. Prince Torsten Eriksson, heir to 3 kingdoms and bearer of the sacred bloodline that stretched back 700 years, crossed the marble floor. His boots echoed like a death knell. 24 years old, newly returned from the Eastern Wars, still wearing the scars of battle across his jaw. He moved with the lethal grace of someone who had killed and would kill again without hesitation. Embla's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if an elderly Omega servant, Hildegard, hadn't caught her elbow. The baby, gods, the baby, let out a thin wail that seemed impossibly loud in the frozen silence. Torsten knelt. Right there, on the marble that had been blessed by 12 generations of kings. He knelt before an Omega holding his child. "This is my son," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the vaulted ceiling. "His name is Alaric. He is blood of my blood. And this woman." He looked up at Embla with something that wasn't quite love but wasn't disgust either, something raw and unnamed. "This woman is his mother." Lady Sigrid's face turned the color of a week-old corpse. "You dare invoke pack law to legitimize a bastard whelped by." "I invoke royal privilege," Torsten cut across her words like a blade through silk. "As is my right as heir. The law states that any child acknowledged by an heir before the blood oath ceremony is bound to the line, regardless of the mother's rank." The hall erupted. Not in cheers, gods no. In outrage. In fury. Alphas shouted over each other. Betas clutched at pearls and propriety. And somewhere in the back, an Omega dropped a tray of ceremonial wine that shattered like Embla's entire world. But Astrid, who had raised her daughter alone after her mate died in the border wars, who had scrubbed blood from stone and taken beatings meant for others, who had taught Embla that survival meant making yourself small and invisible, Astrid watched her daughter's face and saw something she'd never seen before. Oh, dangerous, deadly hope. Lady Sigrid descended from her throne with the deliberate slowness of a predator. "Royal privilege was abolished 6 years ago, Prince Torsten. You were in the Eastern Territories. Perhaps the news didn't reach you through the screams of the dying." Her smile was a wound. "Or perhaps you simply don't care about the laws you're meant to uphold." Torsten stood, and suddenly the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The abolishment was challenged. The Council of Elders never ratified the vote. "Because 3 of the elders died before they could," Sigrid hissed. "Of natural causes. The law," an ancient voice creaked from the shadows, "requires 5 votes to ratify. With 3 elders dead, the vote was never completed. Which means royal privilege still stands." Elder Gunnar hobbled forward, leaning on a staff carved with runes that predated written language. He was 97 years old, blind in one eye, and sharp as a fresh-whetted blade. "I was there when the vote was called. I remember." Sigrid's jaw worked. "You're senile, old man. And you're ambitious, young woman. Gunnar's good eye fixed on her with unnerving precision. But ambition doesn't rewrite history. The crowd shifted. Uncertain now. Pack law was sacred, but elder testimony was sacrosanct. The tension in the room coiled tighter. A spring compressed past its breaking point. Embla still hadn't spoken. She clutched Ulrich against her chest, her knuckles white, her breath coming in short gasps. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, but she didn't run. She'd never learned how to run. Omegas who ran were hunted for sport. Torsten placed his hand on her shoulder. The gesture was possessive, protective, and utterly shocking. The child is legitimate. The mother is under my protection. This is not a debate. Then you've condemned us all, Sigrid said, and her voice was no longer angry. It was sad, resigned, as if she were watching a beloved student walk into a fire. The other kingdoms will never accept an Omega-born heir. They'll see it as a weakness, as contamination of the bloodline. We'll have war before spring. Then we'll have war. Torsten's hand didn't leave Embla's shoulder. But my son will have his birthright. The thing was, and this is where the story gets complicated, where the fairy tale cracks and shows its rotten core, Torsten didn't love Embla. He'd taken her in a moment of grief-stricken rage after watching half his battalion die in an ambush. She'd been delivering fresh linens to the officers' quarters. He'd been drunk on loss and fury and the particular madness that comes from seeing your friend's entrails steaming in the snow. It had lasted 3 minutes. She'd wept the entire time. He'd pretended not to notice. He'd forgotten about it by morning. But Embla hadn't forgotten. She'd carried that violation in her body for 9 months, feeling it grow, feeling it kick, wondering if she should throw herself from the tower and save everyone the trouble. But Omegas were stubborn creatures, bred for survival, and some part of her had whispered, "Keep the baby, raise him in secret, maybe he'll be different." Now here was Torsten, claiming the child not out of love but out of duty. Because kings and heirs didn't abandon their bastards, not publicly. Because Ulrich had his eyes, his nose, the distinctive Eriksson curl to his upper lip. Because denying the child would be denying himself. And Embla understood, with the terrible clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose, that she'd simply traded one prison for another. "The ceremony must continue," Elder Gunnar announced. "The blood oath waits for no man, not even princes." The crowd parted reluctantly. The blood oath ceremony was the cornerstone of pack law. Every alpha, beta, and acknowledged heir had to swear fealty to the king, bind themselves to the collective, promise to put pack above self. It happened once every 10 years, and missing it meant exile. Torsten had to participate, which meant leaving Embla alone in a room full of people who would gladly tear her apart. "Take her to the East Wing," Torsten ordered, looking at Hildegard. "The Blue Chamber. Post guards. No one enters without my permission." Hildegard nodded, her weathered face betraying nothing. She'd seen 6 decades of pack politics, survived 3 purges, and learned that the best way to stay alive was to become furniture. Useful, necessary, invisible. As they led Embla away, Lady Sigrid's voice carried across the hall, pitched perfectly to sound concerned rather than cruel. "How noble of you, Prince Torsten, to shelter your mistake. Tell me, will you also shelter the Omega when the southern kingdoms demand her head as a condition for peace? Will you choose her over thousands of lives?" Torsten didn't answer. Because they both knew he couldn't. In the Blue Chamber, Embla finally broke. She sank to the floor, still holding Ulrich, and sobbed with the kind of violence that comes from months of suppressed terror. The baby squalled in sympathy, his tiny face red and furious. Astrid, who had followed despite the risk, knelt beside her daughter and pulled them both into her arms. "Breathe, little star. Just breathe." "He doesn't want me," Embla gasped between sobs. "He wants the baby. I'm just the vessel. The inconvenient Omega who couldn't keep her legs closed." "You were raped," Astrid said flatly. "Say the word, Embla. Don't let them rewrite it into something else." "It doesn't matter what word I use. Embla's laugh was jagged glass. No one will believe an Omega. They'll say I seduced him. I wanted to trap him. That I'm a scheming. The door crashed open. Not the guards. Lady Sigrid, flanked by 3 beta warriors in ceremonial armor. Out, Sigrid ordered, pointing at Astrid and Hildegard. The Omega stays. We have questions. The prince said. Hildegard began. The prince is occupied with matters of state. Sigrid's smile was a scalpel. This won't take long. Astrid didn't move. You'll have to kill me first. For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across Sigrid's face. Omegas didn't talk back. Omegas certainly didn't threaten. You'd die for her. For a child who brought shame to your bloodline. My daughter brought nothing but herself into this world, Astrid said quietly. The shame belongs to those who would punish her for being victimized. The room held its breath. Then Sigrid laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. How touching. The Omega matriarch defending her whelp. But you misunderstand the situation. I'm not here to hurt her. I'm here to offer her a choice. She turned to Embla, who had gone very still. Leave. Tonight. Take whatever coin we give you and disappear into the southern provinces. Change your name. Raise the child as a merchant's bastard. He'll have a life. Not a good one but a life. Or, Sigrid's voice dropped, intimate and venomous. Stay and watch him become a pawn in a game that will destroy him before his 10th birthday. Watch the other kingdoms demand his death. Watch your prince choose politics over your child's life. Because that's what will happen, Embla. Torsten is not your savior. He's a man who was trained from birth to sacrifice anything for the pack. Embla looked down at Ulrich, who had finally stopped crying and was regarding her with those unsettling golden eyes. If I leave, she whispered, he loses his birthright. If you stay, he loses his life. That's not your decision to make. Torsten's voice cut through the room like winter wind. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his ceremonial robes, blood from the oath ceremony still wet on his palms. Leave. Now. Sigrid didn't flinch. We were just having a conversation. You were threatening my son's mother. In rooms I placed under my protection. With guards I personally assigned. Torsten's eyes found the 3 warriors. Who let you pass? The warriors looked at each other. The tallest one, a woman named Ragnhild, cleared her throat. Lady Sigrid said it was cleared by Elder Gunnar, my lord. Elder Gunnar is in the great hall, overseeing the feast. Torsten's voice was glacier cold. You're either incompetent or complicit. Which is it? Ragnhild went pale. My lord, Get out. All of you. Report to the guardhouse. You'll be reassigned. They fled. Only Sigrid remained, composed as carved marble. You're making a mistake, Torsten. This ends badly for everyone. Your concern is noted. And dismissed. My concern, Sigrid said softly, is for the kingdom you'll inherit. The kingdom your father built through careful alliances, strategic marriages, and yes, occasional sacrifices. He understood that sometimes one life must be weighed against thousands. You used to understand that too, before the Eastern Wars changed you. Something flickered in Torsten's eyes. Pain maybe. Or memory. The Eastern Wars taught me that every sacrifice we make in the name of the greater good chips away at what makes us worth saving. We've sacrificed enough. We've bled enough. This ends. No, Sigrid said, and there was something almost pitying in her tone. This is just beginning. She left, her footsteps echoing down the corridor like a countdown. Astrid was the first to speak. She's right, you know. About how this ends. Torsten looked at her. Truly looked perhaps for the first time. Saw the scars on her hands from years of brutal labor, the premature gray in her hair, the way she held herself like someone who expected violence at any moment. You think I should let them exile her? I think you should do what's best for your son. And I don't know if that's here. His best chance is to be raised as a prince, with all the protections and privileges that entail. His best chance, Astrid said, each word carefully chosen, is to be raised by a mother who isn't terrified every moment of every day that someone will slit his throat in his sleep. Can you guarantee that? Can you promise me that my grandson will be safe in this nest of vipers? Torsten opened his mouth, closed it, because they both knew he couldn't. Embla had been silent through this entire exchange, rocking Ulrich gently, her face blank. Now she spoke, her voice distant, disconnected. I need to feed him. He's hungry. The mundane reality of it, the biological fact of a baby's needs, cut through the political tension like a blade. Torsten nodded, suddenly awkward. Of course. I'll have food sent up. And a wet nurse if you. I'll feed him myself, Embla said flatly. I'm his mother. That's apparently my only value here. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Torsten flinched. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but Astrid saw it. Saw the guilt, the shame, the crushing weight of a choice he hadn't fully thought through. He'd claimed the child in a moment of prideful defiance, but he hadn't considered the logistics. The reality. The fact that Embla wasn't just a vessel to be sheltered and forgotten. She was a person, traumatized and terrified, who would now be forced to raise her rapist's child in his household, under his protection, forever bound to him by blood and law. I'll send for food, Torsten said quietly. And, sorry, for earlier, for what I did to you. There's no excuse. I was not myself. Embla laughed. It was a broken sound like glass grinding against glass. You were exactly yourself. You were a prince who took what he wanted because he could. Because I was there and convenient and no one would stop you. The only difference now is that there's evidence. Embla. Astrid reached for her daughter, but Embla pulled away. Don't. I'm fine. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. None of them was fine. But a fine was a luxury they couldn't afford, so they pretended. They played their roles. Torsten left to attend the feast. Astrid stayed, silent and watchful. Embla fed Ulrich, her hands mechanical, her eyes somewhere else entirely. Hours passed. The sounds of celebration filtered up from the great hall. Music, laughter, the rhythmic pounding of fists on tables as toasts were made. The pack was binding itself together, reaffirming old loyalties, forging new alliances. Down there, in the warm glow of firelight and mead, the world made sense. Up here, in the cold blue chamber, everything was fractured. Hildegard returned with food, roasted venison, fresh bread, a pitcher of watered wine. She set the tray down carefully, her ancient hands steady. Eat, child. You'll need your strength. For what? Embla asked hollowly. For what comes next? It came 3 days later, in the form of an envoy from the southern kingdoms. 5 riders, travel-worn and grim, bearing the 3-headed wolf standard of the Saniva alliance. They'd ridden for weeks through winter storms, their message so urgent it couldn't wait for the spring thaw. King Bjorn received them in the throne room, with Torsten standing at his right hand and the full court assembled as witnesses. Embla wasn't there. She was still confined to the East Wing, more prisoner than guest, though no one used that word. The lead envoy, a scarred alpha named Thyra, bowed perfunctorily. Your Majesty, we bring word from the Council of the South. They have concerns regarding recent events in your court. Concerns. Bjorn's voice was winter frost. He was 63, white-bearded, still powerful despite his age. He'd ruled for 40 years through war, famine, and plague. He didn't appreciate diplomatic euphemisms. Speak plainly. Thyra straightened. The southern kingdoms demand that the Omega-born child be declared illegitimate. They consider the prince's acknowledgement a violation of pack purity laws, and they will not recognize any treaty, trade agreement, or alliance that includes such a child in the line of succession. The court erupted in murmurs. Bjorn raised his hand for silence. The child was acknowledged according to our laws. Your laws, Thyra said carefully, are not recognized by the South. Our pacts maintain stricter standards regarding bloodline purity. An Omega-born child, regardless of the father's rank, cannot inherit titles, lands, or claims. To suggest otherwise is unthinkable. Then perhaps, Torsten said, his voice cutting through the tension, the South should reconsider what it thinks. Thyra's eyes snapped to him. Prince Torsten. Forgive my bluntness, but you've been gone for 2 years. The political landscape has shifted. The southern kingdoms are united now in ways they weren't when you left. They speak with one voice. And that voice is saying, remove the Omega-born heir, or face economic and military isolation. We've faced worse, Torsten said flatly. Have you? Thyra pulled a scroll from her belt and unfurled it. 3 trade agreements set to expire at the spring thaw. The South will not renew them. 2 military alliances are currently protecting your eastern border. The South will withdraw its forces. And, her voice dropped, the marriage contract between Prince Torsten and Princess Ingrid of the Clearwater Pack. The contract stipulates that any prior children must be disavowed before the union can proceed. Princess Ingrid's family will not accept a stepchild of Omega blood. The silence that followed was absolute. Torsten's face drained of color. The marriage contract. I never agreed to. You signed it 3 years ago, Bjorn said quietly. Before you left for the Eastern Wars. I thought you'd forgotten with everything that happened. I didn't forget. Torsten stopped, his jaw working. I didn't think it would matter. How could it not matter? Lady Sigrid's voice rang out from the assembled court. The Clearwater Pack controls the southern mountain passes. Without that alliance, we're vulnerable to invasion from 3 sides. The marriage isn't just politics, Torsten. It's survival. Thyra nodded. Princess Ingrid is amenable to the union, provided the Omega child is removed from succession. She understands the necessity of heirs, but she will not raise another woman's child. Especially not an Omega's child. The room was a pressure cooker. Torsten looked at his father, at the assembled court, at the weight of expectation crushing down on him. And if I refuse? If I uphold my son's claim? Then the marriage is void, Thyra said simply. The alliances collapse. And the South will interpret your choice as a declaration of intent to weaken pack bloodlines across all kingdoms. They will respond accordingly. War, Bjorn said heavily. You're threatening war over a child. We're protecting the integrity of pack law over a bastard, Thyra corrected. There's a difference. Torsten's hands clenched into fists. He's not a bastard. I acknowledged him. Under a legal loophole that may not even be valid, Sigrid interjected. Elder Gunnar's testimony is questionable at best. The man is nearly blind and his memory. My memory, Gunnar's voice creaked from his seat, is perfectly functional. The law stands. Then the law, Thyra said, will cost you everything. The audience that day, later historians would call it the trial of blood and politics, lasted 6 hours. Arguments were made, precedents cited, threats issued and withdrawn and issued again. The court split into factions. Those who supported Torsten's claim, those who prioritized political stability, and a small silent group who simply didn't care either way as long as their own power remained intact. Through it all, no one mentioned Embla by name. She was the Omega, the vessel, the unfortunate circumstance. She had been reduced from person to problem, and problems had solutions. Finally, as the sun set and the throne room grew cold, Bjorn raised his hand. Enough. We will deliberate and provide an answer within 3 days. Your Majesty, Thyra said carefully, the southern kingdoms expected a response today. The southern kingdoms, Bjorn said with steel in his voice, can wait 3 days. We are not a province to be ordered about. We are a sovereign kingdom, and we will address this matter with the gravity it deserves. You have quarters prepared in the West Wing. You will be comfortable there. It wasn't a request. The envoys bowed and withdrew, their expressions unreadable. As the court emptied, Torsten remained standing beside the throne, staring at nothing. Bjorn watched his son with something like sorrow. You should have told me about the child before the ceremony. Would it have mattered? I could have managed it, made arrangements. The child could have been acknowledged quietly, raised in a satellite holding, given a title but no claim. This, Bjorn gestured helplessly at the empty room. This is a disaster. This is me taking responsibility for my actions. No, Bjorn said gently. This is you trying to assuage your guilt by destroying everything I built. And I understand that. You do. But Torsten. His voice cracked slightly. I'm old. I won't live to see the consequences of this choice. You will. Can you live with that? Can you live with the knowledge that your pride might cost thousands of lives? Torsten's jaw tightened. Is that what you think this is? Pride? What else would you call it? You don't love the Omega. You barely remember her name. You're not fighting for her. You're fighting to prove you're different from me. That you're more honorable. More just. But honor doesn't feed starving children during war, Torsten. Honor doesn't stop enemy soldiers from burning villages. So I should abandon my son because it's inconvenient. You should ask yourself, Bjorn said quietly, whether keeping him is truly for his benefit or for yours. The words hit like a physical blow. Torsten reeled back, his face flushing. I can't believe you'd. I love you, Bjorn interrupted. But I love this kingdom more. Have to. That's what it means to be king. And someday you'll understand that. I just hope it doesn't destroy you when you do. He left his son standing there, alone in the gathering darkness. In the east wing, Embla held Ulrich against her chest and sang him an old Omega lullaby, one passed down through generations of women who had learned to survive in a world that considered them expendable. Hush now, little star, the wolves are at the door. But mother's here, and mother's fierce, and you are worth the war. Her voice cracked on the last line. Because she wasn't sure anymore if she believed it. If Ulrich was worth what was coming. If any child could be worth the cost being calculated in ledgers, war rooms, and smoke-filled council chambers. Astrid sat in the corner, mending a torn shirt by candlelight. Her fingers moving with the automatic precision of decades. She looked up at her daughter and saw the girl she'd raised overlaid with the woman she'd become. Harder, sadder, already aging in ways that had nothing to do with years. You could still leave, Astrid said softly. Tonight. I know the servant passages. We could be 10 miles away before anyone noticed. And go where? Embla asked without heat. He's the prince's acknowledged son. They'd hunt us to the ends of the earth. Not if everyone believed you were dead. The words hung in the air between them, terrible and tempting. Embla looked down at Ulrich, who had fallen asleep against her chest. His tiny fingers curled into fists. Fake our deaths. It's been done before. A fire in the east wing. 2 bodies, too burned to identify. The prince grieves appropriately, the political problem solves itself, and you and the baby get to live somewhere quiet. Somewhere safe. That's. Embla trailed off because she couldn't decide if it was brilliant or monstrous. Maybe both. Who would I even be? If not his mother. You'd be Embla. Just Embla. Not an Omega, not a vessel, not a political pawn. Just a woman raising her son. For one shimmering moment, Embla let herself imagine it. A small cottage in the southern provinces. Garden. A life where she was just another merchant's widow. Where Ulrich could grow up without the weight of a kingdom on his infant shoulders. Where she could breathe without fear. Then reality crashed back in. They'd never believe it. Torsten would demand to see the bodies. Bodies can be arranged. The cold practicality in Astrid's voice sent ice through Embla's veins. Mother, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Astrid said carefully, that there are other Omegas in this castle. Those who are sick, dying. Who would take coin to ensure their families were cared for after they're gone? Who would provide what we need? Embla stared at her mother, horror dawning across her face. You're talking about buying corpses. About burning them beyond recognition and passing them off as us. I'm talking about survival. That's not survival. That's... Embla couldn't find the words. How can you even suggest? Because I've lived longer than you, Astrid said, and her voice was suddenly fierce, raw with decades of suppressed rage. I've seen what happens to Omegas who trust in Alpha protection. I've seen the promises they make and break. I've watched women I loved disappear into dungeons for the crime of being inconvenient. And I will not, her voice cracked, I will not watch it happen to you. Tears streamed down her weathered face, and Embla realized with a jolt that her mother was terrified. Not just worried. Absolutely bone-deep terrified in a way Embla had never seen. What happened? Embla whispered. What happened to you that I don't know about? Astrid looked away. It doesn't matter. It clearly does. Long pause. Then, so quietly Embla almost didn't hear. Your father. The one I told you died in the border wars. He didn't die fighting. He was executed. For questioning pack law. For suggesting that Omegas deserved more. They called it treason. They made me watch. The room spun. Embla clutched Ulrich tighter, her breath coming in short gasps. You never told me. Because I wanted you to believe in something. In someone. In the possibility that the world could be different. Astrid's laugh was bitter. But it's not different. It's the same brutal cycle over and over. The powerful take what they want, and the powerless pay the price. So you want me to run, to hide, to live in fear forever. I want you to live at all. Before Embla could respond, the door burst open. Not guards this time. Torsten, his face haggard, his ceremonial robes gone, wearing just a simple shirt and trousers. He looked younger like this. More human. More breakable. The council convenes tomorrow morning, he said without preamble. They'll demand a formal vote on Alaric's legitimacy. If it fails, he stopped, swallowed hard. If it fails, they'll require either disavowal or exile. For both of you. What do you want us to do? Embla asked, and her voice was surprisingly steady. Torsten looked at her. Truly looked, perhaps for the first time since that night in the officers' quarters. Saw the girl he'd broken and the woman she'd become despite him. Saw the child in her arms, his child, already loved in a way he'd never learned how. I don't know, he admitted. And the honesty was somehow more devastating than any lie. I thought I could fix this. Thought I could acknowledge him and that would be enough. But my father's right. This isn't about honor. It's about consequences I didn't anticipate and can't control. Then let us go, Embla said simply. Officially disavow us. Claim you were deceived or mistaken or temporarily mad with grief. Give them what they want. We'll disappear. You'd do that. Give up his birthright. His birthright, Embla said with cutting precision, is a target on his back. I don't care about thrones and titles. I care about keeping my son alive. Something flickered in Torsten's eyes. Respect maybe. Or recognition. If I disavow you, you'll have no protection. No resources. You'll be hunted by those who see you as a loose end. Then we'll be very good at hiding. Torsten shook his head slowly. I can't. I know I should, but I can't look at him and pretend he's not mine. I can't erase him. Even if keeping him destroys everything. Even then. The stubbornness of it, the absolute idiotic nobility, made Embla want to scream. He was dooming them all because he couldn't let go of his guilt, his pride, his need to be seen as honorable. And there was nothing she could do to stop him. Then we're all dead, she said flatly. Not yet. Torsten moved closer, careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. The council vote isn't predetermined. There are members who support your claim. Elder Gunnar, for one. Lord Frederick of the Eastern holds. He has Omega daughters. He understands. If we can convince enough of them. You're asking me to plead for my son's life in front of people who think I'm not even human, Embla interrupted. You're asking me to beg. I'm asking you to fight. I've been fighting my entire life. I'm tired. The exhaustion in her voice was absolute. Torsten flinched as if struck. I know. And I'm sorry. For all of it. For what I did to you, for what I'm asking now, for... His voice broke slightly. For not being strong enough to do the right thing. What is the right thing? Embla asked, and it wasn't rhetorical. She genuinely didn't know anymore. Torsten had no answer. They stood there in the candlelight, the three of them, Prince, Omega, and the child who was both bridge and chasm between worlds. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the castle grounds in white that looked pure from a distance but was already dirty by morning. The council meeting happened at dawn, in the circular chamber where laws had been made and broken for 7 centuries. The room was designed for intimidation. Soaring ceilings, narrow windows, hard stone benches arranged in concentric circles around a single chair where the accused, or in this case the disputed, would sit. They didn't make Embla sit in that chair. That would have implied she had standing to defend herself. Instead, she was made to stand in the center of the room, holding Ulrich, while the council members filed in and took their seats above her. 43 people, representing every major pack and territory in the kingdom, were looking down at her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity to cold calculation. Lady Sigrid stood to open the proceedings. We are here to determine the legitimacy of the child known as Ulrich, claimed by Prince Torsten Eriksson as blood heir. The question before us is simple. Does pack law permit an Omega-born child to enter the line of succession, and if so, what are the consequences for our kingdom? Embla's legs trembled. Ulrich, sensing her fear, began to fuss. His small cries echoed in the cavernous chamber, and she saw several council members wince. Whether from annoyance or discomfort, she couldn't tell. The Omega will not speak unless directly addressed, Sigrid continued, her eyes fixed on Embla with laser focus. This is a matter of law, not emotion. Translation. Your feelings don't matter, your terror doesn't matter. You are a problem to be solved, not a person to be heard. Elder Gunnar raised his gnarled hand. Before we proceed, I would remind the council that this child was acknowledged according to royal privilege, which supersedes standard pack law in matters of succession. The precedent is clear. The precedent, Lord Magnus of the Northern Reaches countered, standing with the ponderous weight of his 300 pounds, was established in an era when Omegas were not considered pack members at all, but property. The law has evolved. We cannot apply ancient privilege to modern circumstances. The law evolves when we vote to change it, Gunnar shot back. Has there been a vote? There doesn't need to be a vote to recognize reality, Magnus growled. The southern kingdoms will not accept an Omega-born heir. Neither will the eastern provinces. Will be isolated, economically devastated, and potentially facing military action. For what? For one child. For the principal, a new voice rang out. Lady Freya of the coastal packs, younger than most of the council, barely 40, with the sharp features of someone who had clawed her way to power. If we disavow this child because he's inconvenient, we admit that pack law can be bent whenever pressure is applied. We become weak. We become practical, Sigrid corrected. There's a difference between weakness and wisdom. The chamber erupted in arguments. Embla stood in the center of it all, invisible except as a focal point for rage and fear and political maneuvering. Ulrich wailed louder, his face red, his tiny body rigid with distress. She bounced him gently, whispering meaningless comfort, her eyes fixed on the stone floor. She didn't see Torsten enter until he was beside her, his hand on her elbow. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable, a claim, a protection, a line drawn in the sand. The chamber fell silent. Prince Torsten, Sigrid said carefully, you're not required to be present for this deliberation. This is my son, Torsten said quietly. Where else would I be? You're too close to the situation to be objective. Good. Objectivity is how we talk ourselves into monstrous decisions and sleep soundly afterward. His voice carried to every corner of the chamber. Let me be very clear, Alaric is my son. Blood of my blood. I will not disavow him. I will not hide him. I will not pretend he doesn't exist because his existence is politically inconvenient. Even if it means war. Magnus demanded. Even then. Collective intake of breath. This was the moment. The point where noble intention crashed against brutal reality. Where ideals met the grinding machinery of politics. Lord Frederick of the Eastern Holds stood slowly. He was 72, scarred from a dozen battles, respected by all factions. When he spoke, people listened. Prince Torsten. I understand your position. Truly I do. Have 3 Omega daughters. I've watched them navigate a world that considers them lesser. But, he paused, his weathered face creased with sorrow, your personal honor cannot come before the kingdom's survival. If the South withdraws support, we lose our grain supply. We lose access to the mountain passes. We lose military alliances that have kept the peace for 3 decades. Thousands will die. Not quickly, not cleanly, but slowly. From starvation. From raids we can't defend against. From diseases that spread when trade routes close. Is one child worth that? The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Torsten's jaw worked. You're asking me to choose between my son and my kingdom. I'm asking you to be a prince before you're a father. Embla felt something break inside her chest. Because Frederick wasn't cruel. He wasn't even wrong. He was just a man trying to prevent catastrophe, willing to sacrifice one small life to save thousands of larger ones. And that was how it always worked, wasn't it? The powerless were expendable. Their pain was acceptable collateral damage. Then I choose my son, Torsten said, and his voice was steel. The chamber exploded. Council members shouted over each other. Accusations flying like arrows. Traitor. Fool. Sentimental idiot who would doom them all for the sake of his bastard. Through it all, Embla stood silent, holding Alaric, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about her mother's offer. The servant passages. The fake deaths. The possibility of escape. It had seemed cowardly in the moment, but now it seemed like the only sane option in a world gone mad. King Bjorn entered the chamber like a cold wind, and everyone fell silent. He didn't sit on the raised throne at the chamber's head. Instead, he descended to the floor level, stood in front of his son and the Omega, and the child who had started all of this. He looked at Alaric for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was a sad smile, weary but genuine. He has your eyes, Torsten. And your stubbornness, if his lung capacity is any indication. Torsten blinked, caught off guard. Father. Let me speak. Bjorn turned to face the council. I've ruled this kingdom for 40 years. I've made hard choices. Sacrificed pieces on the board. Told myself it was necessary that the ends justified the means. And perhaps they did. Perhaps I saved more lives than I destroyed. But, his voice roughened, I also became the kind of man who could look at a child and calculate their worth in trade agreements and military alliances. And I'm tired, my friends. I'm so very tired of making those calculations. Your Majesty, Sigurd began, but Bjorn raised his hand. The southern kingdoms want us to disavow this child because his mother is an Omega. Because they fear what it means if we acknowledge that Omegas are people, not property. That they can bear children who matter. That their blood isn't contamination but contribution. And if we give them what they want, we admit they're right. We admit that some people are disposable. That some lives count less. He paused, his eyes sweeping the chamber. Is that who we are? Is that who we want to be? Lord Magnus shifted uncomfortably. With respect, Your Majesty, this isn't about philosophy. It's about survival. Everything is about philosophy, Bjorn countered. The choices we make define us. And I choose. He looked at Alaric again, at the small red face, the golden eyes, the perfection of new life. I choose to recognize this child as legitimate heir. Let the South withdraw its alliances. Let them threaten war. We'll adapt. We'll find new trade routes, new allies, new ways forward. But we'll do it without compromising our souls. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Sigrid laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. You're condemning us to ruin. For a child who will likely die before his first birthday, because someone will poison him, smother him, or stage an accident. You know this. You've seen how these things work. Then we'll protect him, Bjorn said simply. You can't protect him from everyone. We'll try. Embla finally found her voice, cracked and small but determined. I don't want him protected if it means constant fear. I don't want him growing up in a palace that's really a prison, surrounded by people who hate him. I want. She stopped because what she wanted was impossible. I want him to be happy. That's all. Just happy. Torsten looked down at her, and something in his expression shifted. Often. Then we'll make him happy. However we can. You can't promise that, Embla whispered. No. But I can try. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone expected. 21 in favor of recognizing Ulrich as legitimate. 10 opposed. For abstentions. It should have been a victory, but it felt hollow. Because everyone in that chamber knew the real battles were just beginning. The southern envoys left that afternoon, their faces grim, their message clear. The alliance was dead. Trade agreements would not be renewed. Military support would be withdrawn. The kingdom had made its choice, and now it would face the consequences. That night, Embla stood at the window of the blue chamber, watching snow fall on the castle grounds. Ulrich slept in a cradle that had been used by 3 generations of princes, lined with silk and furs worth more than everything she'd ever owned combined. The luxury felt obscene. Lillian. Behind her, Astrid stirred. It's not too late to run. Yes, it is. Embla didn't turn from the window. The moment they voted, Ulrich became political. If we disappear now, it proves Sigrid right. That we're weak, that the acknowledgement was a mistake. We'd be hunted down within a month. Better hunted than caged. Maybe. Embla finally turned, her face half-shadowed in the candlelight. But I keep thinking. What if Bjorn is right? What if this changes something? What if my son grows up in a world that's slightly less cruel because we refuse to accept the cruelty? That's a beautiful thought, Astrid said gently. But beautiful thoughts don't stop assassins' blades. No. But they're all we have. The weeks that followed were tense, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The southern kingdoms made good on their threats. Trade caravans stopped arriving, grain stores dwindled, prices soared. Riots broke out in the lower city, where hunger had always lurked just beneath the surface. 3 people died in the first week. 12 in the second. The council members who had voted in favor of Ulrich began receiving threats. Lady Freya's husband was beaten by unknown assailants. Elder Gunnar's home was burned, though the old man escaped with minor injuries. The message was clear. Supporting the Omega-born heir had consequences. And through it all, Embla remained in the East Wing, seeing almost no one except Torsten, who visited daily with a dedication that felt more like penance than affection. He brought gifts, clothes for Ulrich, books for Embla, anything he thought might make their confinement more bearable. But gifts couldn't erase the fundamental reality. She was a prisoner in all but name, and her son was a political weapon being sharpened for battles he didn't understand. Then, on the 43rd day after the vote, everything changed. The assassination attempt came at dawn, when the castle was just waking, and guards were sluggish from night duty. 3 attackers, dressed as servants, gained access to the East Wing with forged credentials. They made it all the way to the blue chamber door before Hildegard, arriving early with breakfast, saw them and screamed. The scream saved Embla's life. It gave her 10 seconds to grab Ulrich and run to the small bathing chamber, to wedge herself behind the copper tub, to pray to God she didn't believe in that they wouldn't find her. She heard the door splinter, heard footsteps, heard Hildegard's scream cut off abruptly, followed by the wet sound of a blade finding flesh. Then silence. Embla pressed her hand over Alarich's mouth, terrified he would cry, terrified they would hear his breath, her breath, the thundering of her heart. The baby squirmed against her palm, confused, starting to panic from lack of air. She eased her grip slightly, letting him breathe but still muffling any sound. Footsteps approached the bathing chamber door. "Check everywhere," a male voice ordered, low and professional. "The king wants proof." The king. Not Bjorn. Not Torsten. Someone else. Someone who wanted Ulrich dead badly enough to hire professional killers. The door opened. Embla saw the assassin's boots first. Expensive leather, well maintained. Not a servant's boots. This was someone with resources. The boots crossed to the tub, and she knew he was about to look behind it. Knew this was the moment. Knew she was about to watch her son die. Then, guards. East wing. Assassins. The shout came from the corridor. The boots hesitated, turned, ran. She heard sounds of combat. Metal on metal, grunts of effort, screams. It lasted perhaps 2 minutes, though it felt like hours. Finally. "Lady Embla. If you can hear me, it's safe. Prince Torsten is here." She didn't move. Couldn't. Her muscles had locked. Her body convinced that any motion meant death. "Embla." Torsten's voice, closer now, achingly gentle. "They're dead. All 3. You're safe." She emerged slowly from behind the tub. Ulrich still clutched against her chest. The baby was red-faced from having his mouth covered, on the verge of a scream. The moment she lifted her hand, he wailed, loud, angry, beautifully alive. Torsten was in the doorway, sword still drawn, blood spattered across his face and chest. Not his blood. He looked at her, at the baby, and something in him cracked. He sank to his knees suddenly, as if his legs had given out. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was broken. "I'm so sorry. I thought we could protect you. I thought." Embla walked past him, back into the main chamber. Hildegard lay on the floor in a spreading pool of blood, her throat cut, her eyes already glazing. The old Omega who had shown her kindness, who had helped her through those first terrifying days, who had deserved so much better than this. "Who ordered it?" Embla asked, and her voice was surprisingly calm. Shock probably. Or the absolute absence of surprise. She'd known this was coming. They'd all known. "We're interrogating the survivors," Torsten said, standing slowly. "But preliminary questioning suggests it was coordinated. Multiple families. A conspiracy, not just one malcontent. How many want us dead?" "Enough." The honesty was devastating. Embla looked down at Ulrich, who had stopped crying and was regarding her with those unsettling golden eyes. He didn't understand. He was 3 months old. He didn't understand that his mere existence had inspired murder, had torn a kingdom apart, had cost an old woman her life. "We have to leave," Embla said flatly. "Not flee. I mean officially. You have to exile us." "No. I won't. Hildegard is dead because of your stubbornness." The words exploded out of her, months of suppressed rage finally breaking through. "How many more have to die? How many more riots in the streets? How many more assassination attempts? How much more blood before you admit this isn't working?" Torsten flinched as if struck. "If I exile you, I admit defeat. I admit they were right. Who cares about right? I care about being alive." Embla's voice cracked. "I care about my son not growing up surrounded by people who want him dead. I care about not waking up every morning wondering if this is the day someone succeeds in killing us. I care about," she stopped, tears streaming down her face. "I care about not being so tired anymore." The exhaustion in her voice was total. Bone deep. Soul-crushing. Torsten reached for her, then stopped, his hand hanging awkwardly in the air. "Where would you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere far. Somewhere they can't find us." "They'll find you. There's nowhere far enough. Then at least we'll die free, instead of in a gilded cage." The logic was undeniable, even if it was terrifying. Torsten looked at his son, at the Omega holding him, at the impossible situation his choices had created. Give me one more option. One more attempt to make this work. There is no other option. Then I'll create one. He left without explaining, his guards following, leaving Embla alone with Hildegard's corpse and a baby who didn't understand why his mother was crying. What Torsten created was audacious and possibly insane. A public ceremony, held in the main square, where he would formally present Ulrich to the people and demand their acceptance. Not the council. Not the nobility. The common folk. The merchants, the craftsmen, the servants, the Omegas who had no voice in politics but whose support could shift the tide of public opinion. It's madness, Sigrid said flatly when he announced the plan. You'll be assassinated. The child will be assassinated. It'll be chaos. Then it'll be chaos, Torsten said. But at least it'll be honest chaos. At least people will see that we're not hiding, we're not ashamed. That we're willing to stand before them and say, this child is legitimate, and he deserves your respect. He deserves to live, Bjorn said quietly. Which this plan doesn't guarantee. Nothing guarantees it. But hiding hasn't worked. Maybe visibility will. The ceremony was scheduled for 7 days hence, giving time for word to spread and for security measures to be implemented. Every guard in the castle was mobilized. Soldiers from loyal territories were called in. Rooftops were cleared. Sewers were checked and rechecked. Embla was told about the plan in a terse meeting with Torsten and his military advisors. She listened in silence as they explained the strategy, the precautions, the escape routes if things went wrong. When they finished, she said simply, "No." Torsten blinked. "No. I won't bring my son into a crowd where half the people want him dead. I won't parade him like some trophy to be admired or despised. He's 3 months old. He deserves better than this. This is his best chance at acceptance. This is your best chance at redemption," Embla corrected. "There's a difference." The words hit home. Torsten's face flushed. "You think I'm doing this for myself? I think you're doing this because you can't stand the guilt of what you did to me, what you've put us through. And I understand that. Do. But your guilt is not my responsibility to resolve. Then what do you want? I want to disappear. I want to raise my son in peace. I want to wake up in the morning without checking for assassins under the bed. I want," her voice broke, "I want a life that isn't defined by your mistakes." The silence that followed was crushing. Finally Bjorn spoke. "What if we gave you that?" Both Torsten and Embla turned to stare at the king. "What if," Bjorn continued slowly, working through the idea even as he spoke, "we staged your death, both of you? A tragic accident during the ceremony preparation. The kingdom mourns, Torsten is devastated, and you get new identities, safe passage to the southern provinces, enough resources to start over. Ulrich grows up as a merchant's son. Anonymous. Free. That's," Torsten started. "That's exactly what she wants," Bjorn interrupted. "Listen to her, Torsten. Really listen. She doesn't want your protection. She doesn't want your kingdom. She wants peace. Can you give her that?" Torsten looked at Embla, at the hope blazing in her eyes, at the desperation. He thought about the assassins, about Hildegard's corpse, about the riots and the threats and the endless political maneuvering. He thought about his son, who deserved better than a life of constant danger. "Yes," he said finally, the word tasting like defeat and relief in equal measure. "Yes, I can give her that." The plan was set in motion with ruthless efficiency. A fire in the East Wing, carefully controlled but visually spectacular. 2 bodies. An Omega woman dying of consumption who took coin to ensure her children were cared for, and a stillborn infant from the lower city. Neither perfect matches, but close enough after flames did their work. Embla watched the preparations with numb detachment. This was really happening. She was really going to die, at least officially. Everything she'd been, Omega, mother to a prince's heir, political problem, would be erased in fire and smoke. The night before the staged death, Torsten came to say goodbye. He carried a leather satchel filled with gold coins, documents of identity for a widow named Ellen and her infant son Sven, and letters of introduction to merchant contacts in the south who owed him favors. "This should be enough to set up a small business," he said, setting the satchel down carefully. "Maybe a textile shop. Something quiet." Embla nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Be safe. Be happy. Be free. I loved you the only way I knew how, which was poorly and too late. But I did love you, Torsten." Embla read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she finally understood what he was really saying. He was warning her. Even in death, even poisoned and dying, he was trying to protect them. Because the game wasn't over. It would never be over. As long as Ulrich Sven lived. He was a threat to whoever now controlled the succession. And threats, in the world of pack politics, were eliminated. She burned the letter immediately, watching the parchment curl and blacken in the hearth. Then she went to Astrid's room and woke her mother. "We have to leave. Tonight." Astrid, 7 decades of survival instinct kicking in immediately, didn't ask questions. "How long do we have?" "I don't know. But if Torsten found us, others can too." They woke Sven gently, told him they were going on an adventure, and packed only what they could carry. By dawn, they were on a ship heading south, paying for passage with the last of the gold Torsten had given them 8 years ago. Embla stood at the rail, watching Ljusa disappear into the morning mist, and felt something inside her finally break. She'd been running her whole life. From abuse, from politics, from the consequences of other people's choices. And now she was running again, this time with her son, teaching him that safety was always temporary and peace was an illusion. "Mother!" Sven tugged at her skirt, his brown eyes worried. "Are we in trouble?" She looked down at him, this beautiful boy who had her smile and his father's stubborn jaw, who knew nothing of palaces or pack law or the violence that had shaped his existence. And she made a decision. "No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. We're going home." "But we just left home." "Home," Embla said, kneeling to be at his eye level, "is wherever we're together. And right now, together means on this ship, heading to new adventures. That's all that matters." He nodded, accepting this with the easy faith of childhood. "Will father be there?" "At the new home?" Embla's breath caught. They'd told him his father died before he was born, lost at sea like so many men in coastal towns. It was the easiest lie, the most believable. "No, love. Father can't be with us." "Oh." Sven looked disappointed but not devastated. "That's sad." "Yes, it is." As the ship carried them south, into waters Embla didn't recognize toward a destination they hadn't yet chosen, she thought about Torsten's letter. About love expressed poorly and too late. About the ways people could hurt each other while believing they were helping. About the terrible, beautiful, complicated truth that their son existed because of violence but had somehow become something pure despite that violence. And she thought, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the only victory that matters. Not thrones or titles or political recognition, but the simple fact of survival. The radical act of building joy from ash. The ship sailed on. Behind them, in the kingdom they'd left, Prince Torsten died quietly in his sleep, the poison finally completing its work. The council mourned appropriately. Lady Sigrid gave a moving eulogy about duty and sacrifice. The succession passed to Torsten's younger brother, Bjorn II, who had no Omega-born heirs to complicate matters. And somewhere in the historical records, buried deep in archives that no one would read for centuries, was a note about a fire in the East Wing 8 years prior. 2 deaths. An Omega named Embla and her infant son Ulrich. Tragic. Unfortunate. Forgotten. But Embla wasn't dead. Neither was her son. They were alive and moving and building something new from the wreckage of what had been. And if that wasn't a happy ending, it was at least an honest one. The story could have ended there. Should have ended there. But stories, like bloodlines, have a way of refusing to die. 20 years later, in the coastal city of New Aros, a young merchant named Sven stood in the market square, negotiating prices for imported silk with a stubbornness that made his mother laugh. He was 28 now, tall and broad-shouldered, with brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled and a natural authority that drew people to him without quite knowing why. He knew nothing of princes or pack law. He'd grown up believing his father was a sailor lost at sea, that his mother was a widow who'd built a textile empire through sheer determination. And it was true in its way. Embla, Ellen to everyone in New Aros, had become modestly successful, not wealthy but comfortable, respected. Then the royal delegation arrived. They came by ship, flying the three-headed wolf standard of the northern kingdoms, and the entire city turned out to watch. It had been decades since royalty visited New Aros. The docks buzzed with speculation. Was it a trade negotiation? A military alliance? A royal wedding? Sven watched from his warehouse office, curious but unconcerned. Royal politics had nothing to do with merchants like him. Until a royal guard knocked on his door. "Sven Eriksson?" the guard asked, and Sven's blood ran cold. Not because of the name. Eriksson was common enough in the coastal regions, meaningless. But because of the way the guard said it. With certainty. With recognition. "That's not my name," Sven said carefully. "I'm Sven Larsson." "Are you?" The guard's smile was polite but unyielding. "King Bjorn II requests your presence at the royal residence. Immediately." "I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake. Please come willingly. We'd prefer not to make this difficult." Sven went. What choice did he have? As they walked through the city streets, his mind raced. How had they found him? What did they want? And more terrifying, did his mother know? The royal residence was a commandeered mansion overlooking the harbor. Inside, in a drawing room filled with expensive furniture that looked uncomfortable, sat King Bjorn II. He was 53, with silver threading through his dark hair, and he had the same golden eyes that Sven had been told his father possessed before they changed color in childhood. Except Sven's eyes hadn't changed color. Not really. In certain lights, in moments of strong emotion, flecks of gold still appeared. He'd learned to control it, to keep his head down, to never meet anyone's gaze too directly. He couldn't avoid meeting the king's gaze now. Bjorn studied him for a long moment. Then, "You look like him. My brother. You have his stubborn jaw. His bearing. The way you stand, ready to fight or flee but refusing to show fear. Your Majesty, I don't know what. Please don't insult my intelligence with denials." Bjorn's voice was tired, not angry. "I've spent 20 years searching for you. Well, not actively searching, but watching, waiting, wondering if you survived. And here you are, alive and thriving, which means Torsten's sacrifice meant something after all." The room tilted. Sven gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "My father was a sailor. Your father was my brother, Prince Torsten. Your mother is Embla, once an Omega in the Vinterskog court, now living under the name Ellen. And you," Bjorn's expression was unreadable, "you are my nephew, the rightful heir to the throne that I currently occupy. That's impossible. Be safe, be happy, be free. I loved you the only way I knew how, which was poorly and too late. But I did love you, Torsten." Embla read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she finally understood what he was really saying. He was warning her. Even in death, even poisoned and dying, he was trying to protect them. Because the game wasn't over. It would never be over. As long as Ulrich Sven lived. He was a threat to whoever now controlled the succession. And threats, in the world of pack politics, were eliminated. She burned the letter immediately, watching the parchment curl and blacken in the hearth. Then she went to Astrid's room and woke her mother. "We have to leave. Tonight." Astrid, 7 decades of survival instinct kicking in immediately, didn't ask questions. "How long do we have?" "I don't know. But if Torsten found us, others can too." They woke Sven gently, told him they were going on an adventure, and packed only what they could carry. By dawn, they were on a ship heading south, paying for passage with the last of the gold Torsten had given them 8 years ago. Embla stood at the rail, watching Ljusa disappear into the morning mist, and felt something inside her finally break. She'd been running her whole life. From abuse, from politics, from the consequences of other people's choices. And now she was running again, this time with her son, teaching him that safety was always temporary and peace was an illusion. Mother! Sven tugged at her skirt, his brown eyes worried. Are we in trouble? She looked down at him, this beautiful boy who had her smile and his father's stubborn jaw, who knew nothing of palaces or pack law or the violence that had shaped his existence. And she made a decision. No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. We're going home. But we just left home. Home, Embla said, kneeling to be at his eye level, is wherever we're together. And right now, together means on this ship, heading to new adventures. That's all that matters. He nodded, accepting this with the easy faith of childhood. Will father be there? At the new home? Embla's breath caught. They'd told him his father died before he was born, lost at sea like so many men in coastal towns. It was the easiest lie, the most believable. No, love. Father can't be with us. Oh! Sven looked disappointed but not devastated. That's sad. Yes, it is. As the ship carried them south, into waters Embla didn't recognize toward a destination they hadn't yet chosen, she thought about Torsten's letter. About love expressed poorly and too late. About the ways people could hurt each other while believing they were helping. About the terrible, beautiful, complicated truth that their son existed because of violence but had somehow become something pure despite that violence. And she thought, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the only victory that matters. Not thrones or titles or political recognition, but the simple fact of survival. The radical act of building joy from ash. The ship sailed on. Behind them, in the kingdom they'd left, Prince Torsten died quietly in his sleep, the poison finally completing its work. The council mourned appropriately. Lady Sigrid gave a moving eulogy about duty and sacrifice. The succession passed to Torsten's younger brother, Bjorn II, who had no Omega-born heirs to complicate matters. And somewhere in the historical records, buried deep in archives that no one would read for centuries, was a note about a fire in the East Wing 8 years prior. 2 deaths. An Omega named Embla and her infant son Alaric. Tragic. Unfortunate. Forgotten. But Embla wasn't dead. Neither was her son. They were alive and moving and building something new from the wreckage of what had been. And if that wasn't a happy ending, it was at least an honest one. The story could have ended there. Should have ended there. But stories, like bloodlines, have a way of refusing to die. 20 years later, in the coastal city of New Aros, a young merchant named Sven stood in the market square, negotiating prices for imported silk with a stubbornness that made his mother laugh. He was 28 now, tall and broad-shouldered, with brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled and a natural authority that drew people to him without quite knowing why. He knew nothing of princes or pack law. He'd grown up believing his father was a sailor lost at sea, that his mother was a widow who'd built a textile empire through sheer determination. And it was true in its way. Embla, Ellen to everyone in New Aros, had become modestly successful. Not wealthy but comfortable. Respected. Then the royal delegation arrived. They came by ship, flying the 3-headed wolf standard of the northern kingdoms, and the entire city turned out to watch. It had been decades since royalty visited New Aros. The docks buzzed with speculation. Was it a trade negotiation? A military alliance? A royal wedding? Sven watched from his warehouse office, curious but unconcerned. Royal politics had nothing to do with merchants like him. Until a royal guard knocked on his door. Sven Eriksson? The guard asked, and Sven's blood ran cold. Not because of the name. Eriksson was common enough in the coastal regions, meaningless. But because of the way the guard said it. With certainty. With recognition. That's not my name, Sven said carefully. I'm Sven Larsson. Are you? The guard's smile was polite but unyielding. King Bjorn II requests your presence at the royal residence. Immediately. I think there's been a mistake. No mistake. Please come willingly. We'd prefer not to make this difficult. Sven went. What choice did he have? As they walked through the city streets, his mind raced. How had they found him? What did they want? And more terrifying, did his mother know? The royal residence was a commandeered mansion overlooking the harbor. Inside, in a drawing room filled with expensive furniture that looked uncomfortable, sat King Bjorn II. He was 53, with silver threading through his dark hair, and he had the same golden eyes that Sven had been told his father possessed before they changed color in childhood. Except Sven's eyes hadn't changed color. Not really. In certain lights, in moments of strong emotion, flecks of gold still appeared. He'd learned to control it, to keep his head down, to never meet anyone's gaze too directly. He couldn't avoid meeting the king's gaze now. Bjorn studied him for a long moment. Then, you look like him. My brother. You have his stubborn jaw. His bearing. The way you stand, ready to fight or flee but refusing to show fear. Your Majesty, I don't know what. Please don't insult my intelligence with denials. Bjorn's voice was tired, not angry. I've spent 20 years searching for you. Well, not actively searching, but watching, waiting, wondering if you survived. And here you are, alive and thriving, which means Torsten's sacrifice meant something after all. The room tilted. Sven gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. My father was a sailor. Your father was my brother, Prince Torsten. Your mother is Embla, once an Omega in the Vinterskog court, now living under the name Ellen. And you, Bjorn's expression was unreadable. You are my nephew, the rightful heir to the throne that I currently occupy. That's impossible. Is it? Look at me, Sven. Really look. Tell me you don't see the family resemblance. Sven looked. And God's help him, he saw it. The bone structure. The way Bjorn held his shoulders. Something in the tilt of his head that Sven recognized from his own reflection. Why now? Sven asked hoarsely. If you've known for years, why come for me now? Because I'm dying, Bjorn said simply. No heirs. No wife. I never married, never saw the point. The succession is in chaos. The council is fracturing. And I thought, he laughed bitterly, I thought maybe, just maybe, the son my brother died protecting might be willing to save the kingdom that tried to kill him. You're insane. Probably. But I'm also desperate. Bjorn leaned forward. The kingdom is falling apart, Sven. The reforms Torsten died for never happened. Omegas are still property. Pack law is still brutal. Everything he sacrificed for, everything your mother suffered through, it was all for nothing. Unless I come back and claim a throne I never wanted from a family that murdered to keep me from it. Sven's voice was sharp. Respectfully, Your Majesty, I'd rather drink poison. I understand. Truly I do. But consider this. You have a choice my brother never gave your mother. You can walk away, live your life in peace, and watch from a distance as the kingdom tears itself apart. Or, Bjorn's eyes glinted, you can come back and finish what your father started. Change the laws. Protect the powerless. Build something better. I don't know how to be a prince. Neither did I. We figure it out. Sven shook his head, backing toward the door. I need to talk to my mother. Of course. But Sven, Bjorn's voice stopped him. This is a limited time offer. Have 6 months, maybe less. After that, the council will select a new king, and your chance to change anything dies with me. Sven fled. Literally ran through the streets, ignoring the startled looks, until he reached the modest house where his mother and grandmother lived. He burst through the door to find Embla sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, her face gray. You knew, he said. The king's guard came to the warehouse, and you already knew. Embla looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. I always knew they'd find us eventually. I'd hoped, her voice cracked. I'd hoped we'd have more time. Is it true? All of it. My father was a prince. You were. He couldn't say the word, couldn't process what it meant. I was raped, Embla said flatly. By a prince in grief who didn't see me as human. And you were the result. But also the miracle. Because, despite how you were conceived, I loved you from the moment I felt you move inside me. You were never a mistake, Sven. Never. He sank into a chair, his legs giving out. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to be free. I wanted you to grow up without the weight of a crown you never asked for, without the politics and violence and constant fear. I wanted you to just be. To be happy. Were you happy? Yes, Sven whispered. Gods, yes. I've been so happy. Then I made the right choice. Astrid appeared in the doorway, ancient now but still sharp. What did the king want? He wants Sven to take the throne. To finish what Torsten started. Absolutely not, Astrid said immediately. We didn't survive 28 years of hiding so he could walk back into that viper's nest. It's not your decision, Sven said quietly. Or mother's. It's mine. Both women stared at him. I'm not saying I'll do it, he continued, working through the thoughts even as he spoke. But I'm also not saying I won't. Because, he looked at his mother, you've told me stories all my life. About Omegas who suffered. About the pack law that treated people as property. About a world that needed to change but never did. And now I have a chance to actually change it. How can I just walk away? Because they'll kill you, Embla said, and her voice was raw with terror. Just like they tried to kill you as an infant. Just like they killed your father with poison. They will not allow an Omega-born king. They'll smile and bow and slip poison into your wine within a month. Maybe. Or maybe things are different now. Maybe after 3 decades of instability, the kingdom is desperate enough to accept anyone who can hold it together, even someone with Omega blood. That's naive. That's hope. Isn't that what you taught me? To hope for better. Embla's eyes filled with tears. I taught you to survive. Maybe I can do both. The conversation lasted hours, going in circles, nobody changing their minds, but nobody was willing to let the subject drop. Finally, exhausted, Sven went to his room and stared at the ceiling, trying to process the impossible reality that his entire life had been a lie. Not a lie exactly, but a carefully constructed story designed to keep him safe. And now that safety was being offered up in exchange for responsibility he'd never asked for. He thought about his father, this man he'd never known, who had died trying to protect him. Thought about the kingdom tearing itself apart. Thought about Omegas still suffering under brutal laws. Thought about the choice between comfortable obscurity and dangerous purpose. By morning he'd made his decision. He went to the royal residence alone, without telling his mother, because he knew she'd try to stop him. Bjorn received him in the same drawing room, looking unsurprised. I'll do it, Sven said without preamble. On one condition. Name it. My mother comes with me. She gets a voice in the council. Not as an Omega, not as my mother, but as a full member with voting rights. First Omega in history to hold that position. Bjorn's eyebrows rose. The council will never accept that. Then we change the council. That's the condition. Take it or leave it. A slow smile spread across Bjorn's face. You really are Torsten's son. He would have loved meeting you. He stood, extending his hand. We have a deal. They shook, and Sven felt the weight of history settling onto his shoulders. Heavy. Inescapable. Terrifying. But also somehow right. The return to Vinterskog happened quickly, before Sven could change his mind. Embla was furious, then resigned, then grimly determined. If her son was walking into danger, she'd be beside him, armed with 3 decades of survivor's wisdom and an absolute refusal to be intimidated. The court was. Shocked would be an understatement. The revelation that the long-dead Prince Torsten had a living son, an Omega-born heir who'd been hiding in plain sight for 28 years, sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Lady Sigrid, now 72 and still vicious, stood before the assembled council and said flatly, "This is absurd. We voted on this 28 years ago. The child was declared dead. You can't simply resurrect a dead heir because it's convenient." "He's not dead," Bjorn said from his throne, his voice carrying despite his illness. "He's alive, he's legitimate, and he's my chosen successor. The law is clear. A reigning king can designate his heir. I'm designating Sven, an Omega-born heir," Sigrid hissed. "Nothing has changed. The southern kingdoms still won't accept him. We'll face the same isolation, the same threats." Actually, a new voice rang out, and everyone turned to see the southern delegation that had arrived that morning. The speaker was Princess Ingrid of the Clearwater Pack, now 63, who had been engaged to Torsten 3 decades ago. She stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades accumulating power. "The southern kingdoms have reconsidered our position." The room went absolutely silent. Ingrid continued, 30 years ago we threatened war over bloodline purity. And what did that purity get us? Declining birth rates. Increased genetic disorders from too much inbreeding. Packs dying out because we were so concerned with keeping our bloodlines pure that we forgot to keep them healthy." She looked at Sven with something like approval. "An Omega-born heir isn't contamination. It's genetic diversity. It's survival. The South has finally figured that out, even if it took us 3 decades of suffering to learn." Sigrid's face turned purple. "You're saying..." "I'm saying the southern kingdoms will recognize Sven Eriksson as the legitimate heir. Will support his claim. And will, in fact, be quite interested in negotiating new alliances with a kingdom progressive enough to challenge Pack law orthodoxy." Ingrid smiled. "Times change, Lady Sigrid. Those who don't change with them get left behind." The council erupted in chaos, some cheering, some protesting, everyone talking over everyone else. Bjorn let it go on for several minutes before raising his hand for silence. "The succession is settled," he declared. "Sven Eriksson will be crowned upon my death. Embla," he looked at her, standing beside her son with her chin raised defiantly, "you will join the council as a full member, with all voting rights and privileges. Anyone who objects can leave now." No one left. Because whatever they thought about Omega-born heirs or council reforms, they recognized power when they saw it. And right now, power wore the face of a dying king who'd finally found his courage and a merchant prince who had nothing left to lose. The coronation happened 3 months later, after Bjorn finally succumbed to the illness eating him from the inside. It was a subdued ceremony. No grand celebration, just the necessary rituals and oaths. Sven knelt before the assembled court and swore to uphold Pack law, protect his people, and rule with justice and mercy. When he stood, crown on his head, he looked out at the faces staring back at him, some hopeful, some resentful, all uncertain, and spoke the words he'd been rehearsing for weeks. "My father tried to change the world and failed. My mother survived the world and kept me safe. I'm going to do both. Starting today, Pack law reforms. Omegas are no longer property. They're citizens with full rights. Anyone who harms an Omega will face the same penalties as harming an Alpha. And," he paused, letting the weight of this land, "any Omega who wishes to challenge their status, to seek education, to hold office, can do so without fear of retribution." The silence was absolute. Then, from somewhere in the back of the Great Hall, an Omega servant began to clap. Slowly, others joined. Not everyone, not even close to everyone, but enough. Enough to show that change, real change, was possible. Embla watched her son from her place in the council seats and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 decades. Pride. Not just in surviving but in fighting. In winning. The story could have ended there, neat and triumphant. But life, unlike fairy tales, continues past the coronation. And the real work, the daily grinding work of changing laws, challenging prejudices, surviving assassination attempts from those who hated change. That work took years. Sven ruled for 23 years before illness claimed him, having never married, having no heirs of his own. But he changed everything. The laws he passed, the precedents he set, the slow, patient work of rebuilding a kingdom on foundations of equity rather than oppression, that was his legacy. And when he died, peacefully in his sleep at 51, the kingdom mourned him not as an Omega-born bastard but as the king who had saved them from themselves. Embla outlived her son by 7 years, serving on the council until the day she died, still fighting, still refusing to be silent, still proving that survival wasn't enough. You had to build something better from the wreckage. On her deathbed, surrounded by the Omegas she'd mentored, the laws she'd helped pass, the kingdom she'd helped heal, someone asked if she had any regrets. She thought about Torsten, about the violence that had started everything, about the years of running and hiding, about the son she'd raised to be better than his circumstances, about the impossible, improbable victory they'd somehow achieved. No, she said finally. No regrets. Just, she smiled. Just tell them it mattered. Tell them we fought and it mattered. And it did. Against all odds, despite everything, it did.